that he just shared with the committee today. So he has a report on capital planning for this coming fall town meeting. And then we'll have a presentation and some initial for the FY20 budget. We have a vote to approve superintendent goals under action items, chair report, superintendent report, a long list of future agenda items that we're trying to break out with future meetings, and we'll review next meeting dates. We do have a need for executive session tonight. Strategy, since the chair has determined that to do so in open session would have a detrimental effect on contract bargaining and approval of executive session minutes. And when we come to that, we will have a roll call vote tonight. So having said that, let me open it up to public comment. Is there anyone here tonight for public comment?
There is a group of Lynchies that I would like to introduce for us. They're going to be presenting a very important petition. We have Emily Rogers, Frankie and Isabel Federa, Mia Watson, and Emmy McCabe. You guys want to join us? I'm very proud of these Lynchies. They are truly embodying the civic engagement we want to see in our kids, and they're our future leaders. They're very brave to be here, so I'd like them to go for it.
So welcome. We're a little short on chairs because I see 5 of you, but there is a microphone here. So I will ask whichever one of you wishes to speak, and if you all have something to say, you can certainly take turns, but I would ask you to come down and just so you can speak into the microphone. We can hear you, but this way people at home can hear you too. So welcome.
Okay, so my name is Emily Rogers, and I am at 3rd grade at Lynch. I started a petition for longer recess because this year we only have 15 minutes. It was cut in half from last year. I think we need longer recess because all kids have a lot of energy in their bodies. If you don't get enough exercise and a break from schoolwork, you can't focus, and that stresses everybody out. The teachers have to help you, and the kids just have a hard time. Also, another reason is that if you start a soccer game, a basketball game, or a football game, you don't have enough time to finish, and nobody likes that, do they? I would like to take some time to recognize the work that the kids in my school have done for longer recess. They wrote me notes about why they think we need longer recess. I would like to take the liberty and time to read them to you. Dear School Board, Emily has been trying really hard for longer recess, and it's not just her. She has a great team. We just need an extra 10 minutes of recess. Emmy McCabe. Why do 3rd grade to 5th grades need more than 15 minutes of recess? I think elementary school kids need more than 15 minutes of recess because 3rd to 5th graders have more energy than So why would they need less amount of time for recess than lunch? So we should have 15 minutes of lunch and 30 minutes of recess. Luca. Dear Winchester School Board, we are kids. We need more time to play, but on pizza days, we will need a longer lunch because pizza is more popular. And what if some kid orders lunch and then the lunch teacher says 1 more minute and the kid did not even touch his food? Evan King. Dear Winchester School Board, our school, Lynch Elementary, wants more lunch recess. Grades 3 to 5 only have 15 minutes of recess. Can we have more? Miss Bianchini's class, 3rd grade. Dear Winchester School Board, Emily is my best friend, and I think that 3rd to 5th graders deserve a longer recess, and I hope you say yes. Isabel Fedora. I would also like to present this petition, which has been signed by over almost 200 students and 15 teachers who all support the petition. Some of them are here with us tonight. Mia, Emmy, Isabel, and Frankie. So in conclusion, we ask for 10 more minutes of recess. Thank you for considering our petition.
Thank you, Emily. Nice job. And thank you to all your friends who came tonight. So can I tell you, at a school committee meeting during public comment, we usually don't get back and forth into discussion, but you did bring a couple of questions to my mind. Can I ask you a couple of questions? So is your recess at Lynch before or after lunch this year?
It's before lunch this year. Last year it was after lunch.
It was after lunch. And do you remember a time when doing it after lunch was a new thing?
No.
No? So my understanding is that some of our elementary schools, we've experimented over the past 2 or 3 years. At some schools we had lunch and then recess, and kids were racing to eat their lunch, and in some cases not finishing their lunch because they so desperately wanted to get to recess. I know at Morocco, where my kids go, we switched it for a year or two, and that had some interesting impacts, but I think this year we've actually gone back. So what our teachers and principals really like to do is try new things and learn from when we make changes to figure out what maybe works well. And I appreciate that our district has been flexible about that in the past. So I'm going to ask Dr. Evans, do we know, are all of our elementary schools consistent in terms of when recess is, before or after lunch? So
I didn't know we were going to talk about this.
it may well be, Emily, that we're doing some things differently at other schools, and we should probably kind of talk to those principals too and learn about what's happening. But I really congratulate you on bringing the message forward. You were very clear and very concise and very well poised. And when you're much older, if you turn around, see Evan and Nate are the representatives to the high school, and I have a sense that may be you someday when you get to the high school, given your performance tonight. So I'd really like to thank you all very much for bringing that to our attention. Thank you.
Nice job, guys.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here tonight for public comment? Could be something on the agenda or not. So seeing none, thank you, Emily. I'm going to invite our 2 student representatives to join us at the table in a moment. Evan and Nate from Winchester High School.
Hello.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good.
Hard to top that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think Emily and her friends did a great job. Nice job, guys. It's hard. It's really. Start it off for us. Yep. So over this weekend, the Model UN from Winchester High School attended a one-day conference at Phillips Andover, and a couple of our students were awarded with different titles. So Victoria Correa, Joanna Zhao, and Anna Flaherty were all commended, and Shreya Nair, a junior, was voted the best delegate from the session. The fall play has been announced, and auditions were held in the past week. It is going to be a play called A Flea in Her Ear. Author Fest will be happening October 17th, so English classes will go down during the school day to see the different authors speak. And the Mass Memories Roadshow is a new volunteer opportunity happening at the Jinx Center soon, and a lot of students are getting involved through different clubs even, such as Connect and Commit, or just on their own time. There have been multiple announcements and posters around the school. And lastly, for athletics, we've had the field hockey team tied with Reading recently. Boys soccer defeated Boston Latin at the first Saturday night soccer. Girls soccer beat Melrose 5-0. JV volleyball beat Barnstable 2-1 in their game at Cape Cod this past week. Swimming beat Melrose, which gives them a 4-1 record, and 6 girls and 2 relay teams were qualified for sectionals and states. And lastly, the golf team beat Wilmington 63.5 to 8.5 in their last game.
It's been a busy 2 weeks since we last visited you guys. But last week we had open house on Thursday night, the 27th. And it was a huge success. It was great seeing all the different clubs come gather in the dining commons. And I know Student Council had a blast selling our apparel, and it was great to see the apparel that everyone else had, really rooting on school spirit. I know last meeting we mentioned that the buses were running on time. I'd like to give a little bit of an update on that. There's been a few buses who have run late over the past 2 weeks, and that's just something we're keeping an eye on because I know students want to get to class as soon as possible, but there's still some little hiccups that show up. I want to next just go over what our student council initiatives for the year will be. So over the summer, the officers spent a lot of time discussing what we think will really be most impactful for the student council to do, and we brought those to the table during our student council meetings and had a bunch of discussion on it. So we're proud to announce that student council will be launching a website in the very near future. And so this is going to be hopefully our most powerful tool yet in both reaching out to the student body and the wider community as a whole, and not only reaching out, but then taking feedback from the community. So students and staff and anyone else who wants to get in touch with us will be able to send us a message at their whim, anonymously or not. We'll also be able to post our mission statement on there, have a complete list of members, because there's a lot of confusion within the school just about who student government is, who class officers are versus who their student council representatives are. And so it would be helpful so students can go onto the website, click on a face, and be able to contact their representatives directly. We'll have some fun stuff on there too, like photo galleries of pictures we take during our events, like Night of the Arts. We have people constantly asking us what happens to all the pictures we take, and we have a lot of them, so we'd like to get them out there. Then we'll have a news bulletin. It'll include scheduled events we have in the future, past initiatives we've taken on, and what we're working on currently. And so hopefully that'll keep everyone in the loop. It'll facilitate a lot better communication between us and the community, and we're looking forward to it. Our next most prominent initiative is tackling workload-related stress within the school. And so discussing this at student council meetings, we've really pinpointed that the stress within Winchester is unique because we're such a high-achieving town, and students are always conscious of not only what they're doing themselves, but what their peers are doing, and they're comparing each other, comparing their own actions to what their friends are doing. And while it's healthy to have a little bit of competition, a lot of what we described as backhanded clickiness within the school is derived from that. So hopefully student council, we've been throwing around a few ideas recently, and I'll be happy to report back to you what those are once we have a more solid idea of what exactly we'll do. But we're really focused on doing something immediately this year to help reduce stress, make the school atmosphere less intense, and just something where students can come to school and have a fun time learning. Not everything has to be so focused on college, grades, competition. So that covers it for student council initiatives. And I know last week we said we'd come back with plenty of the buzz that we have about school start time. And so we had a long discussion at our last student council meeting about school start times. And so I'll start off by letting you guys know what we had as results from a preliminary vote that we took. And so following a little bit of discussion, I asked the student council members who's generally in favor, has positive feelings about the school start time, who has generally negative feelings about the school start time, and of those two groups, who would classify themselves as more indifferent than leaning one way or the other. And the results were that 15 student council members have generally positive feelings, with one of those votes feeling indifferent, and 12 members had a generally negative feeling about the school start time, with 2 of those votes feeling generally indifferent. And we had one member who could not vote, but that totals up to a full 24 students, I believe, that voted. And during that vote, we encouraged the representatives to keep in mind not only their own personal preferences, but what they're hearing from the community. And so a few points that popped up during discussion were that several students have tried to gauge for themselves just where opinions lie on the school start time. And I know I had a student approach me in a photography class a couple weeks ago who put together an infographic about a survey he created where he went around and just asked everyone he came into contact with whether they liked the start times or not. And I believe 68% he found of students and staff, and I don't have the exact numbers of who he surveyed, but it was a pretty large proportion, larger than we found, had negative feelings about the school start time. And that was mainly attributed to the fact that after students were done with sports and club activities, they weren't getting home until pretty late at night. And at that point, they're just so wiped that there's not much time for them to do schoolwork, or any schoolwork they're doing, they're not being very productive in that. The remainder of those students that he surveyed that did like the school start time shift cited that they were enjoying having more time in the mornings before they had to leave for school, so there's much less of a rush. Some of those students are now getting to eat breakfast. They're remembering to bring all their school supplies, and so they're getting a better start to the day in that sense. And that's pretty much all I have for general consensus so far about school start times. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. I'm just trying to look over all my notes. I have plenty of comments that I'm sure would address any questions you have.
So I have maybe 2 or 3, but I'm going to throw one actually first to you, Ellen. Can you remind us, effective when did we add that extra bus or half bus? I know you've messaged to the community about that.
So it was effective a week ago yesterday, so it was on Monday, October 1st.
Okay.
Monday and Tuesday of last week, there were a couple of bumps in terms of, because the new bus took stops away from 3 routes, and there was a little bit of intersection. So I know that Monday and Tuesday with bus 9, that there was a couple little hiccups along the way. I have not heard really anything about buses being any issues with them since last Tuesday morning. I have not received any notifications from parents about concerns with there being lateness. I did get a couple of nice phone calls saying that the shift in adding the bus 9 did help alleviate some issues with number of seats on specific bus routes.
Yep.
And that things seem to have settled down with those routes now in the mornings.
So, but fair to say, in making that change, that's something we would expect would in some fashion benefit the high school students. So I wondered, Nate, as you were talking, given when you were getting that feedback and how that relates to adding the bus. And
no, that fits. Well, I don't think any buses have been late since that Monday or Tuesday.
Okay, so that's helpful. I had a couple of thoughts. Your student council initiatives are really interesting. The website seems like a great idea to kind of communicate, who does what. Is the website something you think you're taking on independently, or are you looking for some district support? Would this almost be like a page on the high school website, or are you maybe there yet in terms of thinking about how that would work?
So as of now, we have our own independent site, which we're renting the space from squarespace.com, and so we'll have our own domain. We'll be glad to offer you guys whatever information we have so you can put it up on the district website. I think that would be great. As of now, we have a useful links page, so I know a bunch of the district pages are within that, and that might get rid of a little bit of back and forth if we could just go directly through that. And so that I would be very happy to do that if possible.
And my memory is did you not participate either with MASC or MASS? Was it this past summer or the summer before?
Yes,
in other words, you met
summer.
some peers, right, from other districts. Is this something, do you have a sense, are other districts, high school students in other districts doing something like this to create the digital domain to share that kind of information?
So I know there's definitely an attempt from other student councils to enter that digital sphere more for the students' benefit. So I know our specific student council has tried to get into social media in the past, and while it works for maybe a week or two, it just dies out, and no one's checking their social media constantly, especially to go check out what student council's doing. So as for websites, that's not something I've seen to be overwhelmingly abundant for other schools, but we've definitely found a few other examples that we really like. one not being a public school, but Deerfield Academy has a great website, which I've been in contact with their student council president. We're trying to figure out how we can be a little bit more like their website, if we have any bumps along the way designing it, any solutions they may have for us. It's a great resource.
Great. And then my last comment is, clearly it sounds like depending upon which group you're speaking to or surveying, you may have one group that's trending sort of positive in terms of their impression of school start time. Another group is negative. My sense is there will be other opinions once the snow starts to fall and people travel to school in different ways. And but I'm especially glad to hear you guys are focusing on what you called workload-related stress. For any students for whom the time change adds a layer of stress, I'm concerned about that. But we knew going into this, Judy and Michelle were both clear with the school committee. You'll never find something that works for everybody. So I appreciate your candor, and I like how you're reaching out to everybody, but especially glad that the council is focused on identifying that as a priority. Any questions or comments for our two reps from other members tonight?
I just had this is like very small scale. Do you happen to know when the fall play is, the performances are?
I'm not too sure as of yet. I just found out the name for myself this afternoon after some searching, but I'm looking forward to going to see it.
Let us know. So.
Yeah, I definitely will.
I think Charles was last Monday.
Yeah, okay.
It may be on the district calendar.
Yeah, I tried.
Folks
and
want to check, not on yet?
Website, I couldn't navigate the website well enough, so I was just asking. But I'm sure we'll find out. I'm sure it'll come out. Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys very much. Thank you. Appreciate it, as always. So next we have the consent agenda. What I'd like to do is just punt those items later. If we can jump, Judy, if it's okay with you, can we go to item 5, reports and discussion items, and go into October enrollment?
Sure. Happy to do that. So I have been providing monthly updates around the first of the month to school committee members to let you know where we stand on enrollment. And probably what you have noticed is that in the summer, the numbers go quite high, and then once the secretaries come back and we do the final processing of folks who've maybe moved out of the district or transferred to another school, there's a drop. And so then we get real numbers. And the reason the state collects the official enrollment as of October 1st is to sort of give that first few weeks of school just to make sure that we have a very consistent number. They just pick the date of October 1st. That's what they base all of their kind of planning on and grant allocations, and so they do collect another official enrollment in March from us. But we have decided, I think, even though it's very tempting every month as our enrollment generally goes up and does not go down as people move into the district, to stick with the enrollment from October 1st to October 1st, sort of to get year-over-year comparisons. And so just a couple of things I think that are worth noting as trends between October of last year and October of this year. There shouldn't be any surprises here because you likely have become aware that there are some things we're watching closely. So pre-K, right now we have 85 in-district students in our pre-K. They're split between Vincent Owen and Lynch School. They're listed as Winchester Preschool still, not under Vincent Owen, although on the DESE website it does show 25 or so students as being VO students. They really are preschool students. They're supervised by the preschool, not really part of VO enrollment, but so if you see a difference between VO's enrollment on the DESE website and on this sheet, that's what the difference is, the 20 or 30
Sorry,
preschool
just to clarify.
kids.
So in other words, on DC's website, those 25 kids are not broken out specifically as pre-K?
They are broken out as pre-K, but the total enrollment, they're added into the total enrollment, so it says 455 or something, last year's 2017-18.
Thank you.
The preschool enrollment is composed of some students who are with us all day, every day, some students who are with us just for a half a day, some students who come in for walk-in services, just speech, who don't attend preschool. And so those numbers are constantly shifting as students become age eligible. We work with early intervention. So we aim to keep it at about 95. We save a few slots. So the numbers in October are always fewer than we have by the end of the year. So that's kind of the trend in preschool. We have a waiting list. So we have plenty of typical peers who would like to join the preschool. We have no more rooms and we have no more space to add unless people move out. And some students stay with us for several years, for ages 3, 4, and 5, and then go into kindergarten, or 3 and 4 and then go into kindergarten. So those preschool numbers tend to go up, not down.
How many total classrooms is that?
So there are 2 at VO. There's one that's a substantially separate classroom for students with significant disabilities, and then I think there are 3 more typical preschool classrooms. So maybe 4 classrooms, plus there's an occupational therapy room associated, or a large
Okay.
play kind of space.
Thank you.
Is that right, Jen? Am I remembering all of the preschool classrooms?
I think that's correct.
6. We usually have about
Don't
6.
quote me. Yeah. Do we know what the ratio of typically developing students versus children who qualify? Is this 85 just the children who qualify for the preschool, or is that our total?
No, that's
enrollment?
that's the total enrollment. That
Okay.
includes typical peers. And I think it's usually 7 typicals, something like that for each, 7 or 8, something like that. Jen, is that sounding right?
So we're
They
able to
always
keep
have
that
to-
ratio even though it's.
Yeah, they always have to leave a couple of spots because students who turn 3
Right.
during the year. So.
Yeah, okay.
So, thanks, Jen. You can jump in. So that's sort of the preschool trend. I think if we had the space, we could probably open up another couple of classrooms for preschool. But I would point out that our preschool is not typical in that we are 5 full days all day for a lot of our kids, and many, many preschools don't have any 5 full. They have maybe 4 full or 5 partial, but so that's a strength of the program, and the students leave well prepared for kindergarten. The numbers in kindergarten are up about 15 or so from last year at this time, so our kindergarten numbers are trending up, although they are pretty proportionate to what they were last year overall. And so the kindergarten numbers can vary year from year depending on whether parents are choosing to hold students out another year. So sometimes we typically see about a 10% jump between kindergarten and grade 1. This year, the difference is a little smaller than in typical years. So right now, we're carrying 321 kindergarten 318 or so who are in our district. 1 is out of district, and 3 are just receiving special ed services but not enrolled in the district. That's what that top line is, students who get special education services but go to a different school, which we don't pay the tuition for, or maybe homeschooled. So this year in kindergarten, we have 320, and first grade, we have 328 students. Our largest, as you would expect, continues to be Lynch. But Lynch numbers are equalizing. We're between 80 and 90 students in each of the grade levels. There's 1 small grade level at Lynch at 59, grade 4. Kind of a blip, don't know why. That's just the way it worked out that year. So K is about 328. We jump up about another 20 students or so for grade 2 to 349, grade 3 to 360, grade 4 to 367. Grade 5 is our largest at 401, and the same number we're here last year, right around 400. That's our largest class. So at the elementary level, you can see that individual school enrollment goes up or down a little from year to year. So right now at Lincoln School, we have 431. At Lynch, we've got 487, not including the preschool. VO is 417, and Morocco is our smallest school at 376, and Ambrose is at 395. So fairly even numbers. Lynch continues to be a little bit larger, but Lincoln and VO and Ambrose not too dissimilar in size. So that's sort of the elementary picture. The trend is for folks moving into town not to move in for preschool and kindergarten now, but to enter later grades. And so that's why you see the numbers going up a bit, especially as we get into the middle and high school, and especially at the high school where we tend to gain more students than we expect. But overall, the trend is, as we predicted, fairly level at the elementary level right now. As those numbers that are closer to 400 move up through middle school and into high school, we'll see the high school approach 1,500 if we don't get any additions. I didn't want to raise anyone's blood pressure, and the middle school will be at about 1,200 from the 1,100 we are now.
And assuming all of those go to our high school, not
Right.
to a private school.
Right, and we typically, in previous years, you know, many years ago, would have lost 15% or 14%. We're losing many fewer to private school, although we, you know, that we lose a few. We're losing almost none to vocational schools. We have only a handful of kids at vocational schools now. And we're having more move-ins, and especially after the year has started at the high school, which is also an unusual trend. So as apartments open up, typically, or rental homes, people are moving to town for middle and high school. And some from overseas, and some from other Massachusetts communities, a wide variety. We continue to have a large number of students who have English as a second language. I think at Lynch School, for example, 33% of the kids speak English as a second language. Only about a third of those need services, something like that. So we're increasingly diverse, which is a strength. When we look at middle school numbers, the class sizes are all between 350 and 375 for grades 6, 7, and 8. And then at the high school, our lowest class is the senior class at 312, and our largest is current sophomore class at 368. So we are approaching 1,363 at the high school now, not including postgrads. That's only in grades 9 through 12. We have a number of students who are with us till they are 22. So the picture is that the district enrollment is about what we predicted. No significant deviations in the number of sections that we've required. We projected and equipped the right number of sections. The class sizes are fairly consistent across the district. We continue to maintain reasonable class sizes, except at the high school, which tend to have larger class sizes than we would like, and the middle school, which are larger than our typical middle school peer community class sizes. Many of our classrooms, particularly at the middle school, are very small, which continues to be a concern. Once we have the 6 new classrooms from phase 2, that'll allow us to spread out a little bit, and I hope, you know, add a half a team or some additional electives and sort of spread out and be a little bit more comfortable. We're quite cramped. But I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. We are tracking enrollment very closely and continue to be watchful about any potential 40Bs and the additional students that might come with those as I drive around town and see homes for sale and homes for rent. There's not a week that goes by that we don't have additional students moving into the district or planning to move into the district. So not the stable population that we once had here many years ago, but certainly more people moving in after kindergarten, and that's been the overall trend that I've noticed.
Questions for Judy on the October numbers?
I have a question.
Brian?
About the high school
Mhm.
next year,
Mhm.
just 1 year ahead.
Yep.
Looks like if the 8th grade totally goes to 9th grade and we see everybody just move up, we're talking about 63 additional students. Can you characterize the impact of 63 additional students on the high school next year?
Sure. So of the current 8th grade 390 students, I would expect perhaps 370 to 375 to go to the high school. So it may not be 63, although we could get move-ins, but it may be 50 more students. We're close to reaching a tipping point in many departments at the high school where we have enough students where we could offer another section if we had teachers available. The problem is with adding 1 section or 2 sections, it's hard to attract teachers to teach 1 or 2 sections. And so sometimes we run fewer sections that are larger. If it's a staffing challenge. Sometimes we have a few part-time people who could take on additional section, bring them to full-time. So it's a budgeting issue. I would suggest that if we have 50 more teachers, it's not as clean as at the elementary level where you would add 3 classroom teachers or 2.5 classroom teachers and a few specialists. It really depends on how they're distributed across the grade levels, what kinds of courses they have elected to take. The good news is that we start course selection pretty early, so we have a good sense. And what I've done in past years is put in a placeholder, enrollment-related teachers to be determined, and then we allocate depending on which departments seem to have the greatest need. I can tell you right now, and Nate could probably verify this, there are students who would like to take things that they can't get into because we don't have enough staff. And some of that is a function of not having the budget to add as many staff members as we'd like, but some of it is just a quirk of you can't hire one section of chemistry. It's, you know, very difficult to fill to get a certified teacher to come in and do one section of Italian or, you know, certain courses. And so sometimes it means adding a full person and then having smaller class sizes for a year or two as we sort of adjust the program of studies and students adjust the courses that they'd like to take. And it's a little bit of a challenging task to anticipate how many teachers we'll need. But an additional 50 students at the high school will mean that we will need more teachers, core teachers and elective teachers. And that's something that we knew was coming as this kind of classes approaching 400 attend at the high school level.
You don't see a space concern per se, more a teacher concern, or are you not saying that? Just one.
So the building project resulted in some swing spaces that are used for other things now. I anticipate at some time in the future we'll have to divide up some of the larger group spaces or change classrooms that are currently used for other purposes into classrooms. Not every classroom is used every period. The goal when you build a building is to have 80 to 85% of the time someone's in the classroom. And now we're fortunate that teachers have their classrooms free generally during their planning period, not always. And so it further stresses the building to have teachers travel and be in someone else's classroom. So there are available classrooms for sure, and there are available spaces for sure. It's a question of reconfiguring some of the spaces to make them into classroom spaces if we approach 1,600 students.
Thank you.
Susan.
Just wanted to sort of extend that a little bit. We haven't heard very much or talked very much about the NEAS, the accreditation process, and I'm just wondering if maybe, not necessarily tonight, but we could hear how that impacts the high school's needs and, you know, growing enrollment, and, you know, if the accreditation process sort of highlights that we don't offer enough, you know, varied social studies classes or science classes are too large, something like that, you know, that could kind of impact what we need to do as well. So
Jen, I don't know if you have any
in
thoughts
that
on
at some point.
the impact of additional enrollment or the NEASC report on course offerings or budget.
Yeah, nothing that's come to mind. Like when we read their feedback so far, they do like a conference thing now, which is a new step of their new process. And so we got that report, and there's nothing that struck me that we need to think about around that. But next time I look at it, I'll look with those eyes.
Okay.
New perspective.
It's probably still early in the process too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we won't have it for the next budget year.
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is my hope is that as we get larger and as we take a hard look at our schedule, that we focus less on seat time and more on learning opportunities for students that may be outside the walls of the high school. And so I could see us in the future requiring every senior to do an internship at some point outside of the high school to get a work experience, for example, and that could free up space for more traditional classes, or go to a different kind of schedule that wouldn't require so much face-to-face time. Some distance learning or some flipped schedules for some students. I think right now we are very focused on a very traditional school schedule, and that works for some students. Clearly, our students are very high-performing and are well-prepared for college. But I think there's some missing pieces to the puzzle that would enable students to experience the workplace that would help inform their college choices and help them gain some skills that would give them confidence once they are in the workforce. And so obviously there are some schedules that dictate seat time like AP, some more rigid kind of college prep orientation. And I'm hopeful that there would be more flexibility with that at some point to either accelerate or extend so that students could study for 2 years before they took an AP, or study for 1 semester more intensely to take an AP, that not everybody would have to do it at the same time. Colleges have a lot more flexibility when they give you credit, and so sometimes they accelerate the course or stretch it out. And I would hope that at the high school level, we could be less rigid about our schedule at some point in the future. I'm really hopeful about that, because if we have to have 1,600 or 1,700 students there all day, every day, that's going to really stress that facility unnecessarily.
So can I offer, I'm heartened by some of your remarks here later in this discussion, because when you said earlier about maybe looking at some of our larger spaces, the small group rooms and so forth at the high school, and a notion of subdividing something into a classroom is actually what does raise my blood pressure, because we deliberately design those spaces to sort of do different things and be flexible. So thinking, if you will, outside the box but outside the walls is, I think, the right way to go. And I have to say, I'm going to put Nate on the spot here in all your college visits so far. Something I've really been struck by is how many colleges and universities are speaking to prospective freshmen for the fall of 19 as if they have figured out what they're going to do with their lives. I can't, there has been a complete shift of the pendulum from when I was going through the process, where I think it was understood most incoming freshmen were undecided. If you were in a special major, like I was, architecture and music were the only 2 majors you had to kind of apply for separately. But really, without exception, public and private schools, for my family, our experience is they are really speaking to you and your peers as though you're going to be a chemical engineer, and here's how it's all going to work. And this is where the interest in internship is also coming from. Do you just have a moment to reflect on that? Are you sensing that as well?
Yeah, I can actually give some anecdotal perspective on that. So I've started going to some of the college visits where the admissions officers visit WHS for an hour or 2 during the day or in the morning. And there's always a good swath of juniors that attend those meetings. I can't say that I was one of them last year, but I've started going to them this year. And so the first question the admissions officer always asks is, who wants to be in this field, or this field? And this past week I actually had one that went around the room individually asking about 30 students, what do you want to be specifically? What do you want to do?
Talk about pressure.
And I would have to say 75% of the juniors, undecided, I don't know. But the seniors automatically had their answer because they've been going to these visits, and they know that they're expected to have that answer ready to go. When really they would like to be able to say, I don't really know. But it's what is expected.
So not that it necessarily fixes that, but the opportunity for some of our upperclassmen in the high school to get some work experience, maybe to dissuade them from something they thought they were interested in, or to light a spark, could really be a wonderful thing.
I think so. And I can share my own. Well, I don't know how many people. I mean, in this room, probably all of us went to college thinking we were going to do one thing and ended up doing something else. And so my daughter recently graduated from Boston College with a degree in economics and a minor in Chinese, and decided I'm going to go into finance, because what else do you do with an economics degree? One of my degrees is also economics, so full disclosure.
So there's that.
And English. So then I became an English teacher. So there you go. So she went into finance and she hated it. It was not for her. So she decided she was going to go back to something she was originally interested in, which is something in the medical field. And now she's in a nurse practitioner program. But she took a year to become a certified nursing assistant and work in the field to be sure that she enjoyed patient care. And so had she had the opportunity to do a CNA as a high school student, it might have set her on a pathway where she'd already be a nurse or a doctor. And I would have saved $240,000 on her easy tuition. And I would have given it to her to go to nurse practitioner school. So I guess what I would say is that I think it's ludicrous that we're asking 17 or 18-year-olds to decide on a career that they've never tried for even one day, or they don't even know what their strengths are. Yeah. And so I would envision a high school where kids would engage with things like they'd take a course, they could do phlebotomy to see if they like that part of the medical field, or they could go, in North Reading, they build all of the robots for the Amazon warehouses
Yeah.
all over the country, wherever they are, here. And so I'm actually going to go visit that with some of the Middlesex superintendents, and I'm going to bring Dennis Mahoney and Anna Paradise, because she's interested in STEM, to see if we can get some connection with our students. There are places very close by where our students can engage in real life practice and exposure, and then kind of figure out, am I good at solving problems? Am I good at writing? Am I good at performing? And so I think that it's difficult to say Nate's going to be a chemical engineer or he's going to be a doctor, and he's never even tried any of those things. And you can waste a lot of time and energy, and then you feel like you've gone too far down the pathway and you can't turn back. And so we don't prepare students well for that. And my career exploration orientation wouldn't be designed to have people decide, but to at least understand what they like and what they feel confident engaging in and what they would like to explore further. So I think that's an important part of high school that we're really missing. So that's where I am on that.
This is one of the more exciting sidebars under an October enrollment report we've had in a long time. It makes it interesting. I have just two quick comments on numbers, and I'll go to this side of the table. So, although I don't remember a time when we had quite as many as 14 or 15% of students going private, at one point it was as high as 8 or 9. Then two things happened: the Great Recession and the construction of Winchester High School. So just as we were recovering from the Great Recession, we saw more and more kids start to come. There was a noticeable drop for that first year of construction where families said, I don't want my kid anywhere near that. And then, of course, it wasn't that bad, and it sort of swung the other way. But by my math, if we assume as many as 7% go private, we're still looking net at a 3% increase. So it's that sort of that continual building pressure. And then similarly at McCall, it's about a 2% increase. So not tonight, but when we get into the budget discussion for FY20, we still have that half team at McCall. And that's obviously been driven by enrollment. So it would be helpful for me when we get to that point, if not 20, kind of looking 2-3 years ahead. When do we think the critical mass builds and that half team becomes a full team? You're probably going to say it has something to do with the completion of phase 2. But that would be good for us. That's my point. But, when would we need it, aside from whether or not we really have the space? But I will go to Zena or Michelle. You guys have questions?
Just to clarify, the districts like Winchester used to lose 14 or 15% to private schools, to parochial schools, and the trend is actually pretty consistent in affluent districts like Winchester, going down a bit as high schools are seen like Winchester High School, preparing students well for college. So some of it's a financial decision, some of it's a family decision. A parent went to one of those schools. Some of it's a religious decision. So that's just, that was not a recent Winchester number. That's just sort of a general.
I see.
Affluent districts tend to lose, 12, 14, 15%. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yep.
Yes.
So I had a question. A couple of times you mentioned trends, that the trend is to enter at the later grades, and that the trend has been we keep this many kids. I'm wondering, do we have enough data now over the last couple of years to start to actually plug some numbers into that and try to predict what those numbers and, percentages that we could add into those statements are, so that
Survival ratios.
So we do 1 year and 5 year. We really just look at 1 year and 5 year lately, the cohort survival ratios. So I don't collect data on how old students are when they enter. The reason I know, and I could probably produce a report that tells me this, the reason I know that parents are tending to send their children to school later is because the census data before students are enrolled tells me how many students are age eligible to enter kindergarten, and fewer enter than that. And so we try to say, okay, well, will they be coming to us in first grade instead? Are the parents holding them out? And so that's the source of that data. But certainly from the sort of trends year to year for the last year and for the last 5 years, we produce a report that gives us good data on that. The 1 year can really skew a lot, though, if you have an off year. And we've had that with the high school, where we haven't predicted well, and we had a much more significant increase for students entering the high school from out of town, and so that'll skew the next year's predictions, and it could lead us to be off. So we know from year to year, and as Chris said, Typically, we're losing 7, 8, 9% from 8 to 9. Typically, we're going up 8 or 9 or 10% from K to 1. But this year, last year's kindergarten had 309. This year's first grade has 321. So you can kind of do the math in terms of how many additional either move-ins or people who were here who held students or went to private kindergarten. All of those things play a role. So it's an art and a science.
Right.
I don't want to put you on the spot. You have any questions or comments? You're good? All right. So thank you, Judy. Maybe when we get into FY20 budget development, we
That's
can
when-
circle back and look
Yeah.
at maybe those tools and
Yeah.
that information for the survival ratio. So next we have a report from our capital planning representative, Mr. Benalia, who's been working hard and visiting all manner of facilities, right, and listening to DPW and fire and police and how we have a bunch of money to spend on all these projects.
But that's not what the summary will be.
Oh, that's not what it's gonna be. All right.
Good try.
So I apologize for the lateness of this. I sent out the memo to you all this morning, and you all have it at the table tonight. I gave you an update a month ago, maybe, of where we stood. At the time, I sent out a sort of a summary similar to this. I don't want to go over everything because you can all read it. But I do want to make sure everybody understands what the capital committee does and what kind of money we have and what projects we're recommending being funded and what projects we're not recommending being funded, and limitations. So on this memo, the summary, if you just want to read the summary, you can go ahead and then ignore me until we get to a little bit later, but hopefully not. Sort of the background of what the capital committee, planning committee does. We take, listen to all the recommendations from all the different departments, and then we make a recommendation to the select board and the finance committee for them to put forward at town meeting. We don't actually make any true decisions as far as what is spent. We make recommendations. Finance committee and select board decide whether or not to take those recommendations and bring them to town meeting, and town meeting ultimately makes a decision whether to fund all of those. I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but there's multiple different funding sources. Two different stabilization funds, which were set up from an override back in 2002, and every year of funding goes into the capital and the building stabilization funds, and those are used, the lion's share of the capital projects are funded out of those. One thing that's important to know about capital funding, capital projects really, is that primarily the town, the finance committee, select board likes to fund projects at spring town meeting because that's when financial matters are taken up. However, in particular for school projects, you would like to have, often you would like to try to get them funded at fall town meeting because then you can have all the plans and designs and go out to bid and have it ready to start on July 1 or whenever we get out of school this year, and hopefully have it done through the end of the summertime. So there are some projects that get put forward, and other projects that maybe if it's a heating project, you also want to do a similar thing because you want that done in the summertime so you're not worrying about the heating season having no heating at the same time. So when we get into the projects that we're funding, you'll see that many of them are done at spring town meeting, but some number of them are done at fall town meeting, and I would say more and more are because we want to capture that window in the summertime. And lastly, on the first page of this, again, is just sort of background, other available funds of what we have chosen to make recommendations for. One just point to note is that every year when we look at the two different stabilization funds, approximately $750,000 of that is something called retiring debt. Retiring debt is a custom that the town meeting has been giving the capital funds the equivalent amount of funds of debt that was being paid pre-2002. It's kind of complicated, even just, it's a mouthful, but it's not required by any of the overrides. So at any point in time, the town meeting could choose, based on recommendation of the finance committee or a select board, not to do that. So the funds that we get from the override for capital projects are dedicated to capital projects. The funds that come from this retiring debt, which is about $750,000, could be lost at any time, so we always keep that in the back of our mind. So on page 2 is really what you probably more want to hear about, and that's what the capital committee is recommending. There were about $20 million worth of projects for this fiscal year alone, that would be fiscal year 20, recommended to the committee. And if you look over the next 5 years, because we ask all of the departments to look ahead and project out, there's a total of $66 million worth of projects that have been recommended for the next 5 years. Now we have about $2 million a year to spend on projects. So we really have to look at the different projects. Obviously we can't fund $20 million, nor can we fund $66 million worth of projects. So the committee voted to fund the following projects. 2 from the Building Stabilization Fund. Both of these are fall projects. Neither one is a school project per se, although certainly the library services the school population, and having heating, ventilation, air conditioning that works is valuable to the town. That system's at the end of its life, has been for many years now. And some roofs. DPW also services the town very nicely to have roofs on your buildings. As far as the projects that we voted for the Capital Stabilization Fund, we recommended 10 projects. Of those 10 projects, 2 are specifically school projects that we recommended. That would be Project 4, the Lynch Cafeteria Floor and Ceiling Abatement. And we are recommending fall for this so that we can have everything all set to go ahead on July 1 and get this done over the summertime. And the other one is the Lincoln School Exterior Maintenance. And that also, we recommended fall funding. So again, that can all be done over the summertime. The goal is to impact the students as little as possible. 2 other projects that I've highlighted there, because I think that while they're not specifically school projects, they do have a school impact. One would be every year we have been funding, well, not required to, we have been following the ADA plan that we put forward a number of years ago, and we are funding another $125,000 recommending. Every time I say funding, imagine I'm saying recommending funding, because we can't actually fund anything. We recommend it. $125,000 towards that, and the anticipation is that will go towards the elevators at Parkhurst and Mystic, and be pooled with the other funding that's been put aside for the past couple of years on that. The other project that we're recommending is Ethernet cabling at Mystic. Currently, Mystic School is not wireless enabled. It's not really even wired enabled. Not all the classrooms there have phones in them. Some do, some don't. We saw this as a safety concern, that some of those classrooms could not have phones and that people would have to be using their cell phones. Again, this is not being used as a school building, but someday it could be potentially, and so having this done now would be valuable. But I also want to point out that the cabling won't be done in the lower level. It's only talking about the upper level, because the lower level is being rented out. It's not currently town space, so it'll be ready for the wireless down in the lower level, but the final cabling will not have been done. A number of other projects you can see here: roads and sidewalks, public safety radio upgrade year 2 of 4, town hall generator and public safety generator, both are going to have generators put in. Main Street at Highland Avenue, I don't know if any of you know that area. There has been, I know this well because it's behind my house, there's an accident there every month, and you hear them in the middle of the night, you hear accidents down there. So they're going to try to reconfigure that area. And the last 2 projects are 2 dump trucks. Those can be purchased right off a list. They don't need to go out to bid. So those are also fall recommending funding. So potentially we could have those for snow plowing this winter, potentially. So those are the sort of the projects that we're recommending moving forward. The report that will ultimately go to town meeting has not been finalized. So these are recommendations from a report that is not quite finished. So things could change. We are not planning on certain pools of money that we usually get. That would be a free cash allocation of $220,000. We are not counting on that, so we are not including that in our spending. We're also not counting on, my mind's blanking, closeouts, projects that are complete but still have money left in them, that we'll have at springtime. So potentially, there could be additional project or two could get funded in the springtime beyond what we have here. But at the same time, as I say here, we're still negotiating how to fund the final two flood mitigation program projects, which I haven't mentioned tonight. I mean, this capital is a big subject. We have two flood mitigation projects we're still trying to complete. And we don't yet know how to fund those projects. And last but not least, we are hopeful that if there is an override in 2019, there will be additional funds to capital, and we can start chipping away at these $66 million in identified needs. Many of those are from the school department. We were only able to fund, I didn't actually do the math, $150,000 of direct school projects, of which there were, I believe, $2 million in recommended school projects. So, but we think this covers what the most urgent needs in the town, and unfortunately that was not more school projects than this. So I think that's a, maybe 1,000-foot level, and I'm happy to give more detail. I'm happy to answer any questions. Things are still changing. We're pretty confident in this list. Could get a little bit bigger, things could change a little bit, but that's where we are right now.
So can I lead off with a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
So what was number 11, what was number 12, and what are they worth?
They were,
Off balance sheet question, to your point.
Is there like a reason for wanting to know that?
neither one was a school project.
Okay.
I will, sorry, it's in here.
So while you're digging for that, on the ADA piece, to Brian's point, this is, I think, the 7th or 8th year. It's being recommended we spend allocate $125,000. And it's Meg White's suggestion that this is the year we actually send out an RFP to actually update the transition plan. So we're working off maybe an 8-year-old plan. There was a commitment to spend $1.25 million over 10 years, which is where the 125 comes from. So we've worked pretty well down that pipeline. So if not for this year, certainly the next year, Meg would like to set aside some of this money to basically hire a consultant to update the plan. So that's good practice. It just means that whatever that money is, it could be $40,000 or $50,000, really won't go towards actual projects because we'll need to update the plan. And Brian, with respect to flood mitigation 8 and 10, is it fair to say, I understand there's some debate going on about whether to just bond Project 8, which is the one that's kind of shovel ready. Is it not fair to say there's no funding mechanism or concept for funding Project 10, which would be the last project to actually complete all the flood mitigation work?
So I'll answer the question you didn't ask, which is how to fund flood mitigation Project 8. The Capital Committee put a recommendation to the Select Board that $500,000 be spent from free cash, that the $220,000 a year that we receive from the town, traditionally, of free cash be used for debt service, and that we borrow the remaining 2.3, because it's a $2.8 million project. That has not received a lot of traction as a funding mechanism. I could give you 10 different ways that people have recommended funding that, so I don't know. And as far as project number 10, we have not looked at a way to fund that yet. It's going to be several $1 million, many millions of dollars, so we do not have a project yet for a way to fund that yet. If there are additional capital funds moving forward, we are looking in our wish list. We have asked for many years that we need about $2 million a year in additional capital funding. If we had that, then we would be able to fund these projects moving forward, including that project.
Yeah.
But as far as right now, under the realities that we live in right now, there is no funding mechanism for that next project.
And so the Capital Planning Committee really makes recommendations to management, and we have a new town manager coming. She'll be here for town meeting. So it'll be interesting to see how Lisa plugs into this process and what sort of sensibilities she brings and as she comes up to speed. So there are a lot of question marks, I think, associated around this in terms of trying to figure out what path we go down. Open it up for questions.
Answer your other question if you
Yes.
would like.
Oh, thank you.
The next project, this is a different numbering because of the way it is, but the next project was transfer station electrical upgrades. The electrical system there looks like something out of the 1930s.
Yep.
The next was Lockland and Ridge Engineering. If anybody knows Lockland and Ridge, you take your life in your hands
Yes.
in many different directions depending on where you're going. And the next project was the fire chief's vehicle. Those projects are $35,000, $55,000, and $44,000 respectively. And I believe that I'm certain that the Lockland and Ridge was simply engineering. The electrical upgrades was actually upgrades, and the chief's vehicle is actually a vehicle. And then the next project was actually Morocco classroom sinks and cabinet replacement, year 1 of 2 at $55,000. So
Morocco was 13 or 14?
well, it depends on how you number it,
Yeah.
because the
Right.
numbers have changed.
Okay.
It was 4 down. It was
Okay.
4 down below the rankings. And as far as building stabilization fund, the next project was the electrical study, because that was capital funds.
Yep.
The next project was the engineering study of electrical service at Parkhurst.
So is it fair to say, if there is some, I mean, I don't know how the handoff to a new town manager really will impact any of this, but if there is, depending upon which way the consensus builds around the free cash and the 220 for Project 8, were you suggesting earlier there may be some supplemental funding that right now, we don't see the Morocco sinks on the list, but we might if that funding comes into play for those projects and not for Project 8?
So I need to start using a crystal ball to decide what's happening there, because I would start imagining if this, then that. Because if Project 8 flood mitigation doesn't take place, it might well be because we did not pass an override. And if we did not pass an override, it might mean that the $220,000 that we get is
Yeah.
in jeopardy.
Yeah.
So therefore, we don't have that money to fund anything.
Yeah.
So if everything swirls perfectly, there might be additional funds. However, swirling this way might mean we have less, and swirling this way
Got
might
it.
mean we have less.
Got it.
It's always less.
Right.
Okay.
So it seems as though the next few things on the list are about the same cost or slightly less than the Morocco project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unlike other times when they might be much higher,
It's not like a $300,000 or $400,000 item sitting there.
that you could pull off, right, and
Yes,
then it move
yes.
up. It seems unlikely it would move up at this point.
I should add that there was one project, the Waterfield Bridge construction, that was $660,000, and that actually ranked higher than a number of other projects, but because of the price, it was passed over, and we were given some comfort by Meg White that could wait till next year. So one of the things that I went over a little bit is how much money we retained in these funds. We retained a significant amount of money in these funds because we believe that it's entirely possible that come December 1, we could be told, that needs to be funded
Yep.
now.
Yep.
And if that does, we might need a special town meeting to get funding to get the money out and fund it.
Yeah.
But we would at least have it there. So we didn't want to,
good.
you don't want to go to the bottom of the barrel,
It's good.
especially when you bridge that
Thank you very much.
might need work.
Yeah. Any questions or comments for Brian?
Just an easy, quick one, just because I don't remember. Brian, the two that are on here, the school committee, was that the two we had prioritized, 1 and 2,
It
that we
was-
sent to capital?
It was not. It was 1 and 3.
Okay.
2 was the Parkhurst electrical
Okay.
service. And I don't have a good explanation for why they didn't get ranked in the same order, because when you have 8 different people,
I was just curious how.
it's ranked that way,
Yeah.
and I don't have a good answer for that, other than it was peculiar. One of the recommendations that was made actually at the Capitol table was that we have DPW buildings and we have school buildings, and Pete comes together with a recommendation, but they're separate. And what would actually be helpful for the committee is if Pete says, this school building is actually more important than this DPW building in his mind, or this DPW building is more important, at least as far as buildings are concerned. So I think one of the things we're going to recommend next year is to ask Pete, can you rank all the building projects regardless of whether they're school or not?
Because otherwise, he'll come to Capitol on 2 separate nights,
Yeah.
and he can have, I have a number 1, and on another night, I have another number 1.
Exactly.
Have another night.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Brian, thank you very much. I'll have a little update on the electrical service piece under chair report. Save that for later instead of right now. FY20 budget development process and timeline. Judy, can we talk about that?
Sure, and Ellen can weigh in if she has something she'd like to add. The budget development process is really driven by fixed costs and then projected improvements or initiatives. The fixed costs have a lot to do with staffing and materials that are necessary to carry our business forward from year to year. Our employees are fall into one of 3 or 4 different categories of unionized employees or individual contract employees. The 4 main unions are all undergoing contract negotiations, so the contract settlement is unknown at this point, which makes budget development a little bit trickier. The transportation costs are also somewhat fixed. If our enrollment goes up and tips us to need another bus, that's a place where we could need an increase, but we are on a multi-year transportation contract, so if we are to maintain the same level of service and the same ridership, we know what those costs are. The other big budget driver, about 20 or 25% of our budget, is special education. That is a category of mandated services that includes out-of-district costs, in-district staffing, in-district programs for at-risk students. So you will have a special presentation on special education soon. And as indicated, I think in your agenda on future reports, that's a big part of budget driver for the next year. Also, English Learner, a growing program with multiple staff members and materials and training needed to support our English learner students. Then we have sort of one-time costs, textbook replacement, technology initiatives, and also the amount that we're building into the base budget to sort of have a replacement cycle for technology, professional development, which we all agree has been underfunded, and supplemented by additional outside grant support that's not sustainable in the long run. We also look at where we want to enhance programs, such as world language, additional initiatives in health and wellness, where we want to look at additional elective offerings at the middle and high school, athletics and co-curricular program expansion. And then we look at district goals and individual school improvement plan goals, results of standardized testing and other assessments, reading assessments, to see whether we can identify any areas of need. So if we look at all of those things that go into the budget, we really try to address sort of known and unknown costs. And this year is even more complicated than usual because it very much looks like we'll need an operational override just to maintain existing programs and services, which makes budget projection more difficult because an override gives us an opportunity to address sort of one-time and recurring costs associated with initiatives. So that's sort of the process and what goes into it. The timeline, which is on page 20 in your book, we start the process in the summer. We started looking at district goals and improvement plan, and in September they were discussed and approved. In November, I start to look at long and short-term enrollment projections based on the November 1st figures. We establish our core classroom targets in November through the spring. We convene the budget advisory group, which is a group that is comprised of the FinCom educational subcommittee members, some school committee members, central office personnel. It's an informal group that reports to me in terms of developing the budget, and it really has been a very useful tool to build understanding about what goes into the budget, especially around mandated costs associated with special education and identifying unmet needs in terms of initiatives and what the other budget drivers are. So in December, we'll start to have reports, individual reports on special education, transportation, contracts where they become settled, fees, we look at all fees, and then enrollment projections. And so those are sort of all the component pieces of the budget. So I've proposed some budget goals here, and I'm open to some additions to this list, particularly in light of the fact that we're likely to have a larger budget request this year than in some previous years because we've had so much unmet need. There have been things that have been on my budget ask as needs and necessary improvements for several years that we have not been able to maintain staffing funding for because we've had to increase staffing because of enrollment and other special education costs. So the budget goals are to maintain staffing levels consistent with school committee guidelines. One of the things that enables us to be so high performing is that we have very reasonable class sizes, particularly K to 5, less so 6 to 8, and not meeting targets, I think, in high school at this point in many classes. So I'd like to sort of have an adjustment and add staffing where necessary to maintain elementary guidelines in terms of numbers, and then add at middle and high school as necessary. Funding known and anticipated special education costs. Looking at minimizing fee increases. You can remember that we did add to our transportation fee this year, and athletics. We'd like to keep them as low as possible. Provide increased staffing to meet social emotional needs. That continues to be an ongoing district goal. I really would like to implement the grade 6 foreign language initiative, including adding Mandarin as a non-Western language. We were unable to fund that last year. Continue to fund our technology replacement plan, which entails adding to our base budget so that we have a known amount each year to address both student devices, infrastructure, and teacher devices. Support the recommendations of curriculum review committees, including this year we funded some science materials. We'll have additional science materials next year. We're looking at mathematics. And then deferred initiatives. School committee was quite clear that we'd prefer to have full-time teaching assistants in our kindergarten classrooms. We have half-time. There are some deferred art and music supplies and materials, not a large dollar amount, but still some unmet need there. We need to continue to address infrastructure, software, and hardware and technology. Those are enhancements, not just replacement. And then enhanced professional development. We spend far less on professional development than many comparable districts, especially job-embedded professional development in the form of coaching or other personnel who specifically exist to support teachers and teaching improvement. So those were my first thoughts. If there are other, especially the deferred initiative list that you'd like to see me add as a budget goal, I kind of left that open-ended for school committee to give feedback on that piece. So I'll answer any questions you might have or take additional suggestions for deferred initiatives especially.
So Judy, as we turn the page to page 22 in the packet, you've also included, we're not voting this tonight, a draft budget calendar.
Yep.
So I just called to the committee's attention line number 4. So what Judy's looking to do is kind of have some consensus on our budget goals for FY20 by basically our next meeting. We say late October. I don't know that we typically vote those, but certainly to have some form of consensus. And I think what you have on page 20 and 21 is a good start. Can you, appreciate you talking about foreign language, because that was really very much something we had hoped to have done for this school year that just, we couldn't accommodate it financially for FY19. Can you maybe just reflect a little bit on how, what we may come to consensus on at the next meeting around budget goals? How do you see that informing your discussions, for instance, with the leadership team? Like late November, you're reviewing principal and director requests and goals. And of course, the school committee always welcomes these folks to come and talk to us about their specific requests. So is it fair to say we want to keep our budget goals kind of high level, maybe in line with our district goals that we've approved, so that we get kind of the more specific requests from the principals and directors?
So there shouldn't be anything that the principals and directors ask for that you haven't already heard about, because that's the way we plan. There may be some small ticket items for materials and supplies that sort of have cropped up. But every year for the past 3 years, I have sat with each principal, we've sat with the directors and said, what would you like to have that's not on this list? And so we sort of have a list of those things the big ticket items fall into the categories we've already identified. Textbooks and instructional materials, technology, and additional staffing for electives or core classrooms. And so there shouldn't be anything that the individual principals are asking for that hasn't already been identified in one of the broader categories. So I think at one time, individual principals would bring initiatives that were school-specific to the school committee and make presentations, and because of lack of funding, a lot of those initiatives didn't get supported. Sometimes we fund those through private grant applications, and for example, the alternative furniture, for example, that we piloted and are kind of expanding. So what we try to avoid is individual, particularly at the elementary level, individual schools asking for things that are different than other elementary schools are asking for, because we're trying to keep equity across the district. And so, for example, you shouldn't have one school coming in and saying, I'd like $100,000 for a robotics program at Vincent Owen School, just pulling that out of the air. Because then, but I would not recommend that you fund something at one school that we couldn't fund at other schools. We certainly can pilot things at a school to see whether something's working before we invest. And so that's so certainly we can bring principals forward and they can talk about what they would like to have, what they think students need that they don't have. But individual presentations by principals, I'm not sure that's as helpful as it may have been at one time to the school committee. And so differentiating between a want and a need is always difficult. And so it's going to be a very challenging effort to make sure that our message is clear about what we're asking for in an override, to maintain our level of service and make some modest initiative, address some modest improvement in initiatives and programs. And I think given the many competing demands for the funding that's going to be available, including flood mitigation and capital improvements, it's difficult to ask for something that may not be sustainable over time. That's the second sort of piece of it. You don't want to fund recurring budget costs, take on an obligation and then have to pull back. So that what would be dreadful is to implement world language in 6th grade and then not be able to sustain it the next year and have to go back to just starting in 7th grade and let teachers go. And so anything we ask for has to be sustainable over a number of years. So I guess what I'm looking for is, particularly for the deferred initiatives, we've asked for a lot in the last few years, or identified and told town meeting that we would like to see these things. And I think there's plenty more than we can afford to fund on the list to begin with. So that's the disappointing thing, but also exciting to see that we may be able to make some modest program improvements. But I think only through an operational override will we be able to do that, given our increasing enrollment. That's kind of where we stand. So you don't have to tell me tonight, but before the next meeting, if you want to ruminate on this, if there's anything that you've heard about that I have not, that sort of has a financial cost that I haven't, I will review this with the leadership team and get feedback from the principals and the other central office team members and see what's not on the list that really needs to go on the list. And then they can come and talk about that together, as they have, I think, in the past couple of years as a group.
So I would like to take a moment to talk about the rough outline on page 22, but before we do that, just on sort of the process and the goals, any questions or comments for Judy? Susan?
I had a question. We've talked a little bit about having an adjustment counselor in each elementary school dedicated to each. And I don't know if that falls under social and emotional learning needs.
Yeah, that's that bullet.
Yeah.
Kind of vague.
But it's I'm glad it's, yeah. It is a little vague, and the point I was gonna make is with enhanced professional development, is that more workshops or
and/or coaches, is
but
it
if
personnel?
it's coaches, it's personnel. So it'd be good to identify the things that are personnel really earlier in the process and later, because I think that this would be a time where we really need to factor those things in because those are recurring, you know, costs.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes the most effective thing and the only thing that will address a need. So now would be the time when we're kind of, you know, figuring out what an override amount would be, that now is the time to ask for those things.
Exactly.
Okay.
I had a question about the special education.
Mm-hmm.
Much of our most of our special education funding is actually mandated funding. Like, it's money that we have to spend. It's more of a need than a want. But there may be some special ed initiatives that we would like to do in the district that may actually save the district some funding in long run, or be able to keep more students, make our district more inclusive. When we talk about the budget goals for special education, could we also separate out the wants from the needs in that? Because the needs we're going to have to fund no matter what.
Right, so I think you make an excellent point. I would categorize spending that is dedicated towards intervention or enrichment or addressing the differentiated needs of learners as not special education. So when I say special education, that's just mandated services under an individual education plan. And if we are to offer additional services, which I think we should, above and beyond that, because students have a wide range of learning needs, it is actually less expensive to do it before they're on an ed plan.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing prohibiting us from giving individualized services to students except budget.
Right.
And so I think you could add a category here for interventions or acceleration of learning, individualized learning, that wasn't part of special education, but that is specialized instruction in some way.
Right.
I have another thing for the wish list, drama
Yeah.
curriculum in middle school. I would like that to be at least part of the override conversation, or the wish list.
Sure. Performing arts, some kind of performing arts.
Performing arts.
Yeah.
Much better said.
Yes.
My other thing is, you brought up equity in the schools and how we don't want one school to ask for robotics and another school to not get it. I would also, I'm not sure that this is the right way to bring it up, but I think equity in schools is, has to be looked at from the lens of the parent associations. I don't know if I don't think it's a budget goal necessarily, but it's still a consideration when it comes to enrichment programs and some of the wants. So I would really like us to explore the inequities that we have throughout our schools in terms of the parent associations.
Can you talk a little more about that? In other words, you're suggesting it's not so much getting their perspective on what inequity or equity means, it's so much as some parents associations are offering more to some populations than others. So it's about, regardless of who's paying for it, what is the experience of the child at one school versus another?
Because a lot of our programs, I think our enrichment programs are funded by the parent associations, and they are so different from school to school. So I would like to explore what those offerings are and how to figure out a way where the schools can be more equitable in their offerings.
So the only place I think that we have been really clear with the parent organizations is the funding for technology, and that we limit it to $3,000 for the elementary levels and $6,000 for middle and high school, so that parent organizations are prohibited from raising large amounts of money so that one school will become more technologically proficient than the rest. So that's one area where we have, I think, set some clear guidelines. We haven't set equitable guidelines for enrichment programs. We're really grateful for the hard work of our parents. They raise an incredible amount of money. They put on some great programs. But they are enrichment programs. They're not necessarily, if they were part of our core curriculum, I'd be sitting here saying we need to fund those from the regular budget.
The other thing is, when we look at the enrollment numbers, to tie it in, we have a much bigger Lynch than other schools. Are we meeting the needs of those kids at the same level? I know that that's the core of your principles, so I'm not questioning that, but just to kind of look at it from a holistic perspective.
And Munis will show you Lynch has the bigger budget,
Yeah, I figured.
because they
I
have
know
more
that.
kids.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly ask on that point?
Please.
In any of the other districts where you've worked, is elementary enrichment funded through the town and not the parents' associations? It's part of the
So
school budget?
that's a difficult question. It's varied from community to community. I've never worked in a place where the thing that hurts my heart the most is the middle school co-curricular program completely funded by parents, which it should be. If that's a place where you need to keep the kids engaged and exploring options, that should definitely be funded. But it's $50,000. It's a teacher salary, so that's been a tough choice, right? No, the parent organizations have often contributed in other districts, but the principals decide what the enrichment experiences are, and we try to keep them consistent across the district. In my last district, it was easy because we had grade span schools, unlike neighborhood schools. But the town I live in, Shrewsbury, where I worked, 6,000 students, 9 schools, significant economic differences from one part of town to another, very significant. And so the parents ended up writing checks for the enrichment. And as a parent who wrote those checks, it got very expensive. Buses are very expensive. So I know that our parent organizations raise and contribute a lot of funds for us. We also have in-district enrichment where they bring in speakers. It is something that we would like to take a look at to be sure that there's equity.
And I don't want to take away, I mean, our LPA president is here tonight. I don't want to take away from the culture that they build and how magnificent our parent associations are in building up those environments for our kids. So kudos to all of them, and I appreciate that.
One thing I would as we sort of talk about the budget development process, and Chris and I were speaking about this early, I just want to make sure that everyone takes a look at the timeline on page 22.
Oh, you're jumping ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Are there any other questions before I jump?
I want to
Okay,
go to
ahead.
Brian first.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to pull you back.
No, I'm happy to hear.
Budget goal number 3, ensure that, so these are our goals.
Yep.
Budget goal number 3, ensure that fee increases for food services, athletics, and transportation are kept as low as feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't our goal to be no increase in athletic and transportation fees? And I'm a little, as a follow-up to that, my question is, I don't understand, but perhaps does food service, is it completely net neutral as far as cost, as far as what we pay and what we get? And if so, then the fee increase for food should be commensurate with the cost for town. But as far as athletics and transportation, I think our goal should be no increase. That's our goal. I feel like it should be.
You have to look at what's reasonable versus what is where you're going to hold the line, and the concern always is if our costs increase too rapidly, say for athletics, and we don't have the money to support that, are we going to raise fees? Or are we going to cut sports? And transportation, it is what it is. It's if the cost for transportation went up very significantly, they won't unless we add buses, because we've got a contract and we know what that will be at least for next year. It's hard. You can't save much money by making decisions on transportation unless you decided we're only going to bus K to 5 and not do middle and high school. So if you're in dire straits, sometimes you're forced to make tough decisions. The food service, this is an old kind of recurring thing. You are right in that we don't incur much cost related to food service. I think there are a couple of lunch supervisors on our payroll.
Correct. They come out of the operating budget.
They come out of the operating budget.
But the entire program itself, though, is self-sustaining.
And so I think we've done a good job working with Whitson's to have fairly good tasting, nutritious food. A lot of our kids bring lunches. The reason I like to have a goal to keep the fee increase for food service low is because it's such an expense for families. And if we can find ways to work with Whitson's to source materials in a way or help support their efforts to be efficient in terms of personnel, then we keep that food service cost as low as possible. I think the only, Lynch has close to 10% of the students are on free or reduced price lunch. And there's probably another 10% who really struggle to keep nutritious food on the table and ensure that kids are well fed. Some of our other schools have a smaller percentage, but every school has a percentage of students who are struggling. And so I think it's more of an ethical goal rather than one that impacts the budget so much. We would never raise food, school lunch prices in order to supplement some other portion of the budget, for example, right?
Correct, and there is a formula that we have to adhere to when it comes to our costing of our school lunches as well. That Whitson's make sure that they go on do work annually to make sure that we're in compliance with where we are with what we're charging for school lunches.
In case I wasn't clear, I wasn't saying that I wanted to increase the food service. I would like to. I would think the goal should be that all of these should be maintained. But the food service I put in a different bucket because I believed it to be somewhat cost neutral if the costs go up. But with athletics and transportation, I continue to be very uncomfortable with athletic fees in general. But seeing them go up, when I just think our goal should be that we don't want it to go up. And just like we have a goal of implementing 6th grade foreign language, we don't say unless it's too expensive, in which case we won't. It's understood that the goal would be not to raise athletic fees if we say that, unless we have to. I mean, you know.
Right. I think you make an excellent point. The question for if an operating override is put forward to the voters, the question would be, would you like to set a goal to reduce or eliminate some fees as part of an override? And that's really a school committee decision. Our families are paying thousands of dollars per year for fees that all used to be free when I was in school.
There's instrumental music as well.
And instrumental music, although that's fairly well supplemented, but they still pay. So I think
Doesn't
we
go up,
should
it doesn't go
consider
away.
having a discussion about whether we want to include a reduction or elimination of fees in an override proposal because there are towns that don't charge fees for the things that we charge fees for.
And on that note, so right now, and in draft form, it's a reduction in fees, but that is, in the minds of some, that's a little squishy, because a reduction could be very minor.
$1.
And it could be very temporary, and then it just goes up the next year. So being bold about eliminating something is a place I'd like us to go, at least in terms of discussing it. And I actually wanted to agree with Brian 100%, because while you're right, Judy, increases in athletics or transportation could be offset with fees. That's not the only way to do it. So some of us will remember the town meeting a few years ago at McCall, where 10 minutes before the meeting was called to order, we had 2 different yellow sheets, right? And there was a little bit of brinksmanship with the finance committee on which budget they would support if we were going to hold transportation fees steady for a couple of years. And we said, yes, we would. And we got the budget that we were looking for. So,
And we checked every year to make sure those fees didn't go
and
up.
they did. I have the emails to prove it. Yes, we were looking over our shoulder. So, it's a good goal. Before we go to page 22, Judy, I just wanted to observe, I think there's 8 bullets here. I think at this stage in the process, you can't have too many because we're just sort of early. So I would encourage everybody on the committee, if there's something you think is missing, reach out to Judy and say so. That last bullet is really important, which is those deferred initiatives. So it's not just last year's discussion, but maybe even the year before. If things have come up that you heard of, you have questions about, ask. I want to clarify too, Judy, when I talked about who may be presenting in principals, it's not because I'm expecting the principal of Lincoln to say something different or request something different than John at Lynch. But in fact, for me personally, I have found it very helpful for the principals to come and advocate for our needs. In some years, each message was kind of unique to the school. In some years, it was very much a consistent message, but it was sort of a shared message. And I think we heard from them in a very articulate way how an investment in one particular part of the budget would be helpful for students at Ambrose, be helpful for students at Lynch. And I think to hear from those folks in the buildings just helps us advocate and understand. Remember, at that point, we will have, I'm sure, the education subcommittee from FinCom will be in the room listening as well. So I just think it's an opportunity for everybody to sort of be rowing together in the same direction. But you wanted to go to page 22 and look at a draft calendar, which we'll certainly vote on like the next meeting.
Yes.
Yep.
So the draft calendar is predicated on the date of submission of February 1st to the town manager. So the town manager has to sort of see what the available resources are going to be and then make a determination about what kind of budget is going to go for further consideration to the FinCom and ultimately for town meeting. And so we have a kind of a sprint to January where we'll have an initial budget presentation in December and then some deliberations in January, an open hearing in January, and then you vote on the budget. But that budget is the budget that gets submitted to the town manager. And then as it becomes clearer what the resources are going to be, either through an operating override or through some kind of state funding or grant funding, we can make adjustments all the way up to and including town meeting. And so we meet with the finance committee in March to sort of get a sense for what the finance committee is thinking. And in this year, it may be that we'll have a special election and we'll have determination about available funding through an override that then gets allocated at town meeting in May. What happened last year, and so I want to make sure that school committee members, one of your primary responsibilities is helping to vote a budget that you think is going to sustain the district for the next year. What happened last year is that I recommended a budget. We had some discussion over a series of meetings. And then at a school committee meeting, there were some changes made to the budget to add additional social emotional support, which if we'd had unlimited resources, likely would have been included in my initial budget. I placed world language as a higher priority at that point. And so what I hope we can avoid this year is adding something completely unexpected that we had not discussed before the meeting at the meeting. And so I want to make sure we provide plenty of opportunities for school committee members to listen to constituents, to listen to teachers and principals, and to come back and weigh in on the budget earlier, because that was very, it was challenging to kind of change direction at the last minute right before town meeting. And so I hope that this calendar allows opportunity for everyone to weigh in. The advisory committee, the budget advisory committee, is really geared towards having informal, frank conversations about what the budget drivers are, giving an opportunity, particularly for new finance committee members, to ask questions. I also go to the finance committee and answer questions that are on their minds about our budget, particularly around special education. Is often a big one. And so we're always struggling with having transparent discussions in open session and then hearing from individual school committee members what their thoughts are. The advisory group is a good place informally to discuss, I feel, to discuss issues related to the budget. And we generally have 3 or 4 or 5 meetings of that group before my budget gets presented to you. And so actually got an email tonight from the FinCom saying, when are we going to start the discussion? So gosh, it's only the middle of October, but let's get going.
And we need to establish who's on that advisory committee this year. And I think it would be helpful if you want to stick with that model. So I remind the committee that up until January, it's really the superintendent's recommended budget. And then when we vote it, it's the school committee budget. And we all really need to be speaking with one voice. So I think it would be important to kind of identify those times and days so that members who, whether you're officially a part of that budget advisory group or not, if there's some way folks can listen in to the discussions and follow up with you and ask questions, that they can do so.
Sure.
I mean, 2 observations that I made. Easy one first. So we always flag a snow day. In some years we've used them for when we have the public hearing and the vote. Some years, Judy, if we were scheduling the hearing and the vote on a Tuesday, the snow day would be a Thursday. But as I looked at the calendar, January 29th is also a Tuesday. And so that, to my mind, it suggests a couple of things. There's 129. There's also 12/18, and I realize we're doing other stuff, by the way, as a school committee, right? We're not just developing a budget. So forgive me, I didn't look at my long-term calendar for you. I don't know if we have a school committee meeting scheduled on December 18th, but what we've done in the past is we've really tried to work with Dennis, for instance, at the high school in developing the high school course of studies, right? Because what we didn't want to do, there was a time when we would vote the budget, and then literally the next month see a course of studies proposal and a member would say, well, you know, what happened to this, or what happened to this? Well, it's not in the budget. And we're looking at each other like, wait a minute, we just voted the budget. So there's just a lot, right, that's gonna be happening, overlapping this. So
Right.
18th might be an opportunity, depending upon if we're hearing from certain directors or principals. It would be helpful to see that maybe in a little more detail. We should absolutely kind of figure out if we want to do a snow day and the public hearing the week after, or can I do it on a Thursday? Those are the only things that jumped out at me.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions on the draft calendar?
We can also do a budget workshop during the day.
Sure.
When people
yeah.
are around, which is great.
Yep.
Some of these during the day, or,
Yeah.
you know, different people
Yep.
might be around too.
I really appreciate Judy getting this to us early, because I think there was a sense last year among some committee members that it happened very quickly, but she was quick to point us back to the calendar, and it was what it was. So this is the time, when we vote this in a couple of weeks, you know, this is what we're gonna stick to. So I might ask you to, you know, look at what we're suggesting is happening in November and December, and think about all the other things you have going on in your life and how much time you think you're gonna need to process what you may be hearing. And if you feel like we need to add a meeting, now would be the time to speak up. This is very helpful, Judy. Brian, yeah.
The third from the bottom, school and finance committees, education subcommittee meetings, February to April. What do you envision is taking place during that time period after the school committee has voted a budget, and
It's generally discussions of what we anticipate the available funding to be and what adjustments we need to make.
There's usually a gap.
There's usually a gap, and those discussions focus around, gee, we really think that we're gonna need to take 2 million from free cash to cover this, and that's too much. So we're giving you a signal, or here's what health insurance is looking like on the town side. Really, the unknowns are how much revenue we'll be able to take in, what the sort of trends are looking like, what the state aid is likely to be, what the circuit breaker reimbursement is likely to be. And so as we kind of get all of those things, the finance committee likes to weigh in and kind of give some indication about where they'd like us to see us cut. And so usually it's not, wow, we have $5 million extra, let's add some things. It's always, you know, what needs to be reduced.
And we need to be very careful, because if that should happen, and that ebbs and flows with time, it's not the purview of the finance committee to suggest that one program should be cut or a position be cut, right? I'm looking to my longtime finance committee member.
They knew
It's
that
really
well.
about the dollars. And I know that many of us know that, but committees do change with time, and you can get some new members on a committee who, you know, frankly, either don't know that as explicitly as they perhaps should. So on the one hand, it's right for FinCom to ask a lot of tough questions, and in their own mind, they can maybe prioritizing what's more or less important. But at the end of the day, it's just about the dollars.
Go ahead.
if I may follow up on,
Please.
so what's taking place, I totally agree with what you just said. So can I trust that whoever is on the school, our
School committee,
advisory-
finance subcommittee.
Finance advisory committee
Yes, it's really the superintendent's advisory committee.
will be reporting back to the school committee, because ultimately it's the school committee budget that's already been voted, so we'll need to be, I mean, if those meetings are taking place, obviously a quorum of us can't be at that meeting. Well, we could be in the audience, but we
Be
can't
there.
be sitting at the table.
It's posted, yeah.
It's posted.
I do post them.
Oh, it is, I thought it was an
It's not,
advisory committee.
it is.
It is.
It's not required, but
Okay.
in interest of transparency,
Excellent.
I post them all.
Okay.
So that if anyone wants to come and listen, they can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other committees don't have to worry about it being, you know, having a quorum of their members in attendance. It really is, the open meeting law rules say it doesn't need to be posted because it is strictly an advisory committee to me as I inform the school committee about what the resources and needs are. But I think we're well served to have it posted.
Okay.
So not to beat the dead horse, but because it is an advisory committee to you, and then you propose a budget. Once we vote it, it's our budget, it's the school committee budget. And our policy, our school committee policy is very clear, actually, about the authority the superintendent has to develop that budget and call on a variety of resources. So, Judy's practice is a little different than her predecessor. If Judy feels more comfortable with a sort of an ad hoc budget advisory group, that's her purview. But I read that line that Brian's, talking about. It says school and finance committees, subcommittee meetings. So we have in the past had a finance subcommittee of the school committee. the finance committee has had an education subcommittee. It's a mouthful, but then each group sort of meets that FinCom subcommittee, hits us with a bunch of questions. These are typically the folks who've been sitting in the meetings during the development of the budget. And then we've had a couple of folks on our behalf, on our subcommittee, who are advocating and answering questions and so forth. So this is maybe something we can continue to talk about over the next couple of weeks, because when we develop this calendar, I think an open question for me was, if you have an advisory group to the superintendent, what is their role once we actually vote a budget? That is a little unclear to me. Not that we need to resolve it tonight. But I think absolutely, if Judy wants to have an advisory group as opposed to a subcommittee, which is the way we used to do it,
Right.
that's her authority to do so. And I think our policy is clear about that.
Okay.
And thank you, the outline and the dates just like made it so clear to me, and
Oh,
being
good.
new to it, I couldn't believe how easily I read through it. I was like, oh, well, good.
We typically
It's
don't get a
English.
calendar this early, so I really appreciate that Judy brought this forward to us.
When you dive in the middle of it in the spring, it seems a lot less.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Because there's always.
It's fluid.
I've done this many, many years. Every budget seems to be different.
Right.
So that's just the nature of the beast.
Right. Okay, so why don't we, before we go to action items, if we can, jump back to section 4. We had 2 items. We had meeting minutes of September 25th and a gift from the Winchester Scholarship Foundation. If I go to the minutes,
These are on the consent agenda, though,
yeah, but
Yeah,
we got rid of
right? Oh,
that.
you moved them
Yeah,
up.
since you weren't here, we got rid of the consent agenda. It's your fault. You missed that.
I'm perfectly content with that.
So, on page 7, we only have one set of meeting minutes. Under district goals and improvement plan, top of page 7, it says the committee made some suggestions to the improvement plan, which the superintendent will incorporate into the document. We discussed maybe some sort of a graphic, and Judy's actually taken a stab at it herself, kind of a graphic organizer of our district goals, which I think committee members thought, would be useful. We've approved the district goals, as written, but I would request for Frida, we, insert that in there, that request was made, and that Judy's working on that with the leadership team in some fashion. And I had a couple of minor typos I'll just share with Frida after the fact. Punctuation stuff, but that was
Okay.
all I had. Anybody else had any other comments on the minutes of September 25th? Entertain a motion to approve as amended.
I move that we approve the minutes from the September 25th school committee meeting as amended.
Second.
All in favor? Aye, unanimous. And then we have Winchester Scholarship Foundation, High School Science and Engineering Fund balance. Is Judy, you or Ellen speak to this?
I can speak to it briefly. I
Okay.
met with Ted Lansom from the Winchester Scholarship Foundation. They have a number of funds that are held in different ways based on how gifts were originally made. And so as he was sort of cleaning up his finances, he found that there was a fund balance in an account that was called the Winchester High School Science and Engineering account, which was a deposit made in the mid-90s in anticipation of a special project, but that was never used. So since it was not originally held for scholarships, he felt it was appropriate to return it to the district for use for science and technology. And so I would ask that you would accept this $19,350.01 fund balance, and then Jennifer, Elena, and I will work with the high school to be sure that it's used for science and technology engineering.
Is it your plan not to go to a personal services line, but to some investment in instructional materials, or what could this actually go for within the department?
Yeah, we were thinking about kind of a variety of things, some spawning from student interest around things, like in the CTC Center, some kind of capitalizing on things people have started with. So they did, for the first time they launched Ozobots, and then Anna Paradise did a PD around it on the PD day. So that may be generating that interest within the department. So we had a few ideas, but we're going to flesh it out with the high school to
Great.
see what, where their interest lies with those pieces. So.
This is like finding $5 in your coat pocket that you didn't know was there.
But way better than
I was gonna say-
Way better than $5.
$5 with compounding interest
God.
from 1990.
I need one of those coats.
If you remember
Yeah, I
that,
need
you
one of
know,
those.
when you were a little kid and you found your milk money left.
I would just like to say for the record, the Winchester Public Schools don't have this kind of money just sitting around somewhere. With Ms. Whittemore and her predecessor, right?
Yeah, no,
Pinching
we've
every penny.
scrubbed. There's not any, no $5 to be found.
That's right.
Can I ask a question about, forgive my ignorance, but what is Winchester Scholarship Foundation?
I'm so glad you
Oh.
asked that. And probably the reason you don't know about it is they are very kind of behind the curtains operation. They give hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships to our graduates, but they ask for no fanfare. Their funding is often very generous donations from anonymous and non-anonymous folks, Winchester folks and others. They graduating seniors put in applications. Some are continuation scholarships that go on and fund other things like medical school or other graduate programs, but primarily it's undergrad. And I don't know, Ellen, if you remember the dollar amount from their last report, but it was a staggeringly generous amount of scholarships for our students. And all volunteers in the organization making this happen behind the scenes. They have a fairly large endowment in some of their funds, and they use that to maintain their scholarships. It's incredibly well invested and scrutinized, and they give us an annual report each year. But they don't advertise who gets the scholarships. It's needs-based, and they are extremely careful to be sure that they're using their funds wisely. It's an incredible organization and very behind the scenes.
So it's kind of like WIFI, but post-graduating from high school.
It's all scholarships, all
Or like
post.
Rotary scholarships, college scholarships.
It's
like
college and graduate school, I think, or medical school kind of scholarships, needs-based, and I can share the report. He does give me an annual report. If you'd like to see it, if you'd find that useful, I can certainly share that with you. We are very grateful to the Scholarship Foundation because what they're trying to do is do it in a way that maintains the dignity of the students who are getting needs-based scholarships, and so that's why they don't announce them. But they're so grateful that many of the students go on to be very successful and then years later repay in terms of making a generous gift, and then they can pay it forward. And so this is one of the great things about Winchester, that people do things for no personal recognition, no fanfare, just because they know that families need it.
In her presentation last week at Winchester High School, Suzanne Onso talked about this notion of reach schools, sort of safe schools, target schools in terms of the college application process, and that there are families in Winchester for whom, a kid will apply to a school where they really, really want to go, they get in, and mom and dad actually weren't aware they were applying there, and it comes down to money. And that there are situations where parents are saying to their child, you can't go there, we can't afford it. And the Winchester Scholarship Foundation helps, address that very issue so that a lot of kids kind of get to realize their dream. I would also say, many districts, we give an arm and a leg to have one foundation. We are so fortunate. 5 come to mind here. You've got the Scholarship Foundation, WIFI, Winchester Sports Foundation, John and Mary Murphy, the Cummings Foundation. We are just so blessed to have so much of this support. And in great, really many of them don't kind of push the fanfare. They just kind of quietly do their work, and then they bring forward a gift, which we always appreciate. So, the generosity, not just of the organization, but frankly of everybody who's supporting them and writing checks is profound.
So I met with the consultant who's doing the town master plan, and one of the questions he had for me was, he was astonished how low our per pupil spending is for the achievement levels that we're getting. He said, I cannot fathom how you are managing on the funding that you had been given. And I said, in many instances, the community is supporting our students in other ways. And so organizations like the one Chris just mentioned are really helpful. And the parent organizations obviously are incredibly generous as well. So this is just one, but I will find the last Winchester Scholarship Foundation report and send it to you, because you might just find it interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Make a request
Mm-hmm.
that informally, it doesn't need to be at the table, you let us know what this money ends up going to, just so we can
Sure.
see its good use.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Happy to hear a motion.
I move that we accept the fund balance from the Winchester Scholarship Foundation to be used in the Winchester High School Technology Department as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you very much. Okay, superintendent's goals.
Page 23 in your book. So thank you for your feedback on the superintendent's goals, which are aligned with the district goals. I have made some minor changes. You probably noticed that they were discussed at the previous meeting. And I hope that I have incorporated everything that you asked for, and so I just need a final vote tonight.
Would it be possible to highlight what you changed? 'Cause
Sure.
I caught them, but.
Sure. So, if we look at, I think the major change that I made was to talk about aligning with the district goal. If you look at district improvement goal number 2, key actions.
Yep.
Increase district efforts to attract and retain more diverse staff members and ensure that hiring practices result in the selection of staff members with a commitment to inclusive practices.
Right, okay.
So that was one that I had incorporated. I didn't make much change to the 2 district improvement goals around building projects or financial planning. I looked at district improvement goal 1, review the effectiveness of the change in school start time initiative and report back, minor change there. So it's just minor tweaking here or there.
You made the one tweak to district improvement goal 3 that we had requested. That looks good.
Okay.
I'm sorry, for district goal 2,
Mm-hmm.
I thought, I must have misheard. I thought
Mhm.
the change was also going to include, where is it? Expand purposeful efforts to ensure that school cultures and climates are supportive, inclusive, and welcoming for all teachers, staff, students, and families.
Oh, under bullet 3?
No, just in the actual goal itself. I thought we were gonna highlight that right here.
I'm sorry, Zena, I want to be sure I follow you.
Oh, I don't think I caught that from last time.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
hoping that.
Can you read that?
Yeah.
Read that for me again?
If
Yeah.
that's okay with
Sure.
everybody.
Yeah.
Left-hand
You're right,
column.
good catch.
Expand purposeful efforts to ensure that school cultures and climates are supportive, inclusive, and welcoming for all teachers, staff, students, and families.
That should just match what we.
I
Yeah,
thought
it's
it
just
would match the
paralleling.
key action.
Yeah, I
Right.
didn't catch that. Thank you. Okay, was there anything else I missed? Okay.
Actually, in the district improvement goal 3,
Mhm.
key actions, the second bullet,
Mm-hmm.
it says statements of interest for
Statement of
Lynch.
interest.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's SOI for Lynch
Yeah.
School. Yep.
So I just remind the committee, DC recommends that superintendents put forward a professional practice goal, a student learning goal, and between 2 and 4 district improvement goals. So Judy could have said, well, we got a lot of building going on, I'll just do those 2. But I appreciate that in district improvement goal 1 and 2, it's outside the school building projects. The school building projects actually do take a lot of her time through EFPBC and other things. So, it's a full plate with 6 different things here for us to react to. So I appreciate that very much. Okay, so you've had a couple of meetings to look at these and reflect on them. Happy to hear a motion to approve Judy's goals for 18-19 as presented tonight with a couple of typos that we
Yep.
picked up.
Move that we approve the superintendent's goals for 2018-19 as amended.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so very brief chair report. So I mentioned, I think at the meeting last time about the Parkhurst, our elevator project, that work continues. I just want to share with you all, our sense is, given the work we've done to date, that we'll not be in a position to move forward on elevators for Parkhurst for the summer of 19. However, we have requested the architect and engineering firm to just go ahead and continue to develop and complete the construction documents. One of the things that we own in that RFP is a final estimate based on some kind of finite drawings. There is some sort of, I don't want to say concern, some assumption that some of the figures we're seeing in the early estimates might be kind of conservative just because we don't have full drawings yet. So, and that makes sense. So we're cautiously optimistic those figures might come down a bit. The other thing that really jumped out to me, though, is the cost estimator is seeing for this kind of work, which one can just generally define as messy work in a building climate where if you go down the Leverett connector and just look from like your 11 o'clock to your 4 o'clock, I've never seen so many cranes in Boston. So if you're a contractor, there's a lot of opportunity out there. And you can imagine if you're in the business, you might be more inclined to go after a simple greenfield site, new construction. So when we're talking about renovation of existing buildings, you know, pumping concrete in and around 2 or 3 corners, cutting into a slab, this is just simply messy work. And so I think that may be driving some of the escalation. So the estimator is actually seeing over 4% annual escalation for this kind of work. In fact, right now I think we're carrying 4.2%. This elevator project comes out of that. We mentioned it earlier, the ADA transition plan that was created 7 or so years ago. And so at that time, in fact, we thought the consultant's figure for an elevator was low. We doubled it. And we were assuming between 1% and 2% escalation a year. So clearly that hasn't happened. So, but we're going to keep pushing. We're going to get the design work done. We'll get harder numbers. And then even if it becomes then a summer 20 project instead of 19, there would presumably be that extra year's worth of the $125,000 funding. The other piece, and Brian mentioned it in his discussion tonight, was the second priority we had for capital was the electrical upgrade? Right. So an elevator at we have what's called single-phase power here at this building, and an elevator requires 3-phase power. We just don't have that. So it will require an electrical upgrade to Parkhurst. Well, the good news is that we've done enough work with the electrical engineer. We have a sense of what that's going to cost. And right now it looks to be somewhere between $75,000 and $80,000 of project cost, just that one component. That doesn't get you the elevator, gets you the transformer, gets you the power, the service right into the elevator, and then would in fact upgrade the rest of the building through a 3-phase service, so we would have some additional power. I think Ellen's talked before about all the flood work we've done downstairs. We have receptacles, you know, that have been added in the building. And so frankly, we kind of need to work backwards and look at the primary electrical service. So when we were talking, Brian, you know, many months ago about wanting to do this, we didn't really have a sense of what that was going to cost. That's part of why I was fishing for what was number 11, 12, and 13. So this remains a work in progress. One scenario I've kicked around in my mind is when we get the drawings done and we have a better sense of cost, we might want to go back and revisit in the next capital cycle that electrical upgrade, because we'll actually have a detailed scope and we'll know what it costs. And that might also help us in terms of funding. The last comment I'll make is our long-term budget planning meeting. We have another one scheduled for, I believe it's Friday, 8:30. That I was just confirming that's not posted yet, but it will be as a school committee meeting, so you know folks can participate. That'll be at Town Hall in the Selectmen's space, so look for an announcement either from me or from Frida on that once we get it posted. Plan on an hour or so. And I guess that's pretty much it for me.
Sure.
What do you have?
Just a couple of things. I want to thank Ellen Whittemore and the business office for continuing to make adjustments to the buses. I think we've landed in a good place. We will continue to monitor, and we'll let you know how we progress. The Middlesex superintendents met recently. We meet regularly to try to talk about innovation. So we met with a representative from the Simon Company, which is the largest owner of malls and outlets.
Oh, yeah,
and,
that like SY. Yeah.
the mill at kind of places.
Yeah.
But they have a big Simon Youth Foundation, and have a lot of money to give away. And so one of the things we're exploring is possibly doing a collaborative alternative high school located at the mall in Burlington for the league that would be mostly funded by the Simon Youth Foundation, that could give students a work experience in one of the buildings around the mall or in the mall. They have similar alternative high schools all over the country, lots of different models. And so it's exciting to, all of us have students who could benefit from that kind of a program. And so to partner with an outside organization, they don't provide a curriculum, they just provide the space. And they provide money for professional development for teachers to explore alternative education. And so I'll keep you posted on that. We'll continue to explore that. Kind of an interesting,
And that doesn't require any monetary investment on our end?
there would likely be monetary investment on our end, but the options available for alternative high schools for students are limited, and all of us don't have enough of a. Sometimes you can make a donation in the form of a staff member instead of a tuition, or a part of a staff member, or part of a counselor. Lots of different models, so we're just at very preliminary stages.
I was just thinking it's something else from
In the
our
budget.
wish list.
Yeah.
Is this like alternative high schools for a certain population?
It's primarily for students who are typical in their cognitive abilities, but have some other barrier to being successful in a traditional, 7-period day high school experience that's just geared for college prep. It really is. They really started to address dropout issues. That's not an issue for us, but we certainly have students who could benefit from a different kind of educational experience.
I'm just wondering how it compares to like a vocational school. So it's completely different than that.
Right, it's not a vocational school, it's really individualized, and so often there's a job coach who will identify an area of interest for the student and then arrange for a work experience. And then there was a representative from the DESE at the meeting as well, and was encouraging us to explore this. So it would be kind of a unique model. Alternative schools generally are managed by special education collaboratives, so they're really just for students on IEPs. This would be for students on or off IEPs who needed it. So
Do you know if they've,
exciting.
have they discussed this with the Burlington Planning Board?
I don't know, but
Because we're talking about making use of space at
yeah,
the
I
mall,
think
right?
there are a couple of anchor stores that are pulling out, namely
right.
Sears, that would open some
Space.
space.
I'm just asking because some of what I've read in the press that's being presented to the Burlington Planning Board does not involve something like this, although this sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Mm.
I just want to remind you that we're hosting the MSBA Senior Study Group tomorrow at Lynch School to talk about possible next stages of renovation or replacement of Lynch. Still a long, long road ahead before that happens, if that happens in this cycle, but just the next stage. And finally, I just want to commend the coalition, the Winchester Coalition for a Safer Community. They have been putting on and partnering with other organizations to put on some really good parent programs. There's a series of luncheon meetings where you can go, and I believe most of them are at Town Hall.
They are, so they're downstairs at Town Hall. I've attended one, and the first one I attended, missed today's. And it was crowded. It was packed. People
So-
out the doors.
so they're really-
Yeah, Zena was there as well.
They're,
At the first one. Yeah.
trying to do some innovative things. They have a website, they have a Facebook presence. I try to retweet. So if you don't follow me on Twitter or you're not on Facebook, we have a feed from both of those sites on the front page of our website. So you can just go on and sort of scroll up and down to see what I've posted recently. If you're not a real social media person, you don't have to have a Twitter account or a Facebook account to follow what I post on the front page of our website. So feel free to take advantage of that. But I just want to commend the coalition for trying to really meet the needs of the population in town, particularly the parent population with their programming.
Can I add too that this is the first time I recall that we had a in plain sight set up in the cafeteria at McCall during open house.
We've done it several
Last
times.
year, too.
Was it last year?
We did it last year,
Last
too.
year.
Maybe I didn't cut through the cafeteria then last year, but this year, I mean, I noticed
did
it
it at
in
Town Hall before.
Town Hall. I know, but it was
It was there last, at least.
Yeah,
last
at least
open
last
house.
year.
It was at McCall.
Yeah.
So I thought it was great. I clearly didn't go through the cafeteria last year. I was avoiding all the muffins and donuts, which this year I did not avoid. But it was great not only to see that, but Sergeant Paranek was there as well, meeting and greeting people. And because of the high number of study halls we have on the schedule, we had a lot of parents going into that space, getting to meet him. So that was an interesting use of the space. I know, I wish we didn't either, but that was pretty effective. All right, thank you very much, Judy.
Sure.
Anything else that you?
That's all.
Okay. So for future agenda items, it's a lengthy list, world language curriculum review. But by the way, this reminds me, on the budget planning piece you had talked, there was a bullet, Judy, tonight about curriculum reviews. So I guess I just wanted to clarify quickly. I'm sorry, I was going to ask that question earlier. Page 21, support recommendations of curriculum review committees, materials and staffing. This is separate and apart from, outcomes. You're just saying in terms of material support to conduct them. Okay. Long-term budget planning report, FY19 budget realignment, technology plan update, curriculum review status update, MCAS accountability update. How do we measure student success? Enrollment projections in December, special education report, and wellness action plan update. And then, Judy, should we also just add FY20 budget goals for our meeting in a couple of weeks,
Sure.
so we don't lose sight of it? I think that was the only new thing that came out tonight. Anything else come to mind? Susan likes a longer list.
We did talk about sort of our committee meeting protocols or
Norms.
and standards and
Yep.
Committee norms
Yep.
school committee norms. Okay,
Good.
there it is.
Okay.
It's in there somewhere.
self-assessment?
In the haystack that is my mind. Yes.
Good.
Did we
Next
wanna-
meeting
I'm
dates.
Sorry, did we want to put on appointments?
Oh, yes.
Some of them are different than others, but yes.
Just in
I mean,
general?
that should be just an open item, yes. And maybe some news to report on that front soon.
Okay.
Because if we don't, we need to, talk about posting and so forth. So when we have open positions on some committees, if the school committee is an appointing authority, we can just simply appoint. There have been times when there was nobody who was interested, and so we posted. That's, it's actually kind of a neat process, because sometimes people come forward you didn't expect. So we should absolutely, I think in our next meeting, we can talk about that in a little more detail. Next meeting dates, October 23rd, November 8th, and November 20th.
November 8th is a daytime.
We talked about a daytime. Have we actually picked a time yet, or we need to, forgive me, I don't know, did we set a time?
Yes,
We did.
There's a time set.
12,
12,
12
okay,
noon.
thank you.
Bring a sack lunch.
Okay,
Okay.
Future dates.
yes,
We've talked a number of times about having some of our meetings be a little bit earlier and some of them not. I don't know if it's a possibility, just to consider as you're setting the dates.
Yep.
Have some that, I don't know if it works for who it could work for, but potentially 6 o'clock meeting. I know that the staff here, I'm sure, would be happy to go home a little bit
so
earlier.
the last time we discussed this, because it was so successful over the summer, a certain school committee member said, I would love to be able to do
It's
it, I
hard.
just need to figure out what my kid's soccer schedule looks like.
And
And then I'll let you know.
It's always going to be hard.
No, I appreciate
I
that.
feel like some, every other one,
Okay,
something like that.
Be
Something
great.
to look for.
Thank you.
if there's some flexibility there, that's helpful.
And there's always something. If it's 7 o'clock, there's always an issue. If it's at 8 o'clock,
Yep.
there's always an issue.
Okay.
Got it. Okay, so we do have a need to go into executive session this evening for the purpose of discussion of Unit A contract negotiation strategy. Since it's been determined that to do so in open session would have a detrimental effect on contract bargaining, and we have approval of executive session minutes. It's a roll call
It's a
vote.
it's a run-on sentence. but-
We will go back into open session only to adjourn the meeting. So I'll go to Susan.
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much.
There you go.